Well, I haven't got much to live up to now, have I, with that introduction? So thank you very much, Professor Story, and thank you so much for inviting me, and also thank you to the Nestlé Nutrition Institute for the invitation to attend too. So I'm Roy. I'm a former secondary school teacher, and today I just want to give you sort of a case study, a flavour of what's happening in the UK at the moment. Mainly around food and nutrition education, but what I wanted to do was to put that into some context about what's happening around child health, particularly, and also about policy that's happening in the UK, which is helping to drive healthier lives through good food and nutrition choices. I hope I'm going to press the right button. There we go, that's good. So a little bit about BNF first of all. So we're a small independent charity and not-for-profit. We were established 50 years ago, so we had a very nice birthday party last year from 1967. Our aim really is to make nutrition science accessible to all, and that is quite a challenge, I can tell you. And we do that through lots of different work. So our school engagement program is one aspect, but we have a nutrition bulletin, a peer-reviewed journal. We run conferences, publications, and so forth. So lots of different pieces of work. Our patron is our Royal Highness, the Princess Royal, so Princess Anne. And you may know her. She was a former Olympian. So that's very good to have her support. And you can find out about us on our website. So really today, as I said, a bit about the child health and the context in which we work within the UK and about the policy that's helping to drive that. I'm going to give you a flavour of what's happening in the school curriculum, plus some work that we did last year with the Jamie Oliver Food Foundation, which was the first time where anybody actually done some research to see what was the impact of food education in schools. I want also to talk about the training, the importance of training. And it was interesting, the previous speaker talked about continuing professional development of staff. And I also very passionately believe in supporting teachers as a professional group in this area, particularly if they've been asked to actually teach this formally in the school curriculum. I'm going to touch on more of a whole school approach, again, trying to pull everything together. It's a little bit fragmented at the moment, but there's work and scope to do. And then about working with others as we go through today. So a bit about the context, really, and I think quite of the speakers this morning are echoing what's also happening in the UK. So we know through the National Child Measurement Programme that we have in the UK, or in England, that when children come into school, about 4 or 5 years old, one in 5, so in reception we would call it, is overweight or obese. And as they move through their formal education, which we would call in the primary phase, when they come out the other end, and they're 10 or 11 years old, it's actually 1 in 3 are overweight or obese. So there's an increase in overweight and obesity as they move through their first real primary education phase as we go through. And that actually continues up until they're about 15 years old. So by the time they're 15, it's still about 1 in 3. So it's not getting worse, but it's still quite alarming figures that we have here. And we know, and the research that we've had so far in this wonderful workshop, that we know that childhood obesity is also associated with some socioeconomic status. So some interesting stats here from Public Health England. So obesity prevalence in the most deprived 10% of areas in England is more than twice the prevalence in the least deprived. So we know that there's some socioeconomic issues around that. And here's just some interesting slides, and hopefully you might be able to get this presentation. I put lots of links into the resources, and Public Health England has a wonderful slide deck that you can get. And I just thought it was interesting to look at the main features about why it's an issue, because it's widespread, prevalence remains high, and there's a large cost, not just the cost to health, but also the economic cost, something like £6.1 billion. But also know that there's an issue, an impact, and being important about the obesity harming children and young people. So whether that's through their emotional and behavioural aspects, about being absent from school, the health issues, and as well about the risk of becoming overweight going into adulthood. So these are all sort of confounding factors that we have to live within. But overweight and obesity isn't just the only issues that we have in the United Kingdom, and I'm not going to go through this chart, but it's just really to make reference that we also have deficiency in lots of micronutrients with young people, and also particularly with fibre. And I think fibre doesn't get enough attention. On the coach this morning with Diane, we were talking about sugar seems to get quite a lot of attention. It seems to be quite sexy, if I can use that word, but fibre doesn't. But fibre's very important to health at the same time. So we do have this issue with overweight and obesity, but also some micronutrient deficiency, potentially in the UK too. And just to sort of round off this sort of miserable section of my presentation, if we look further at child health, I thought these were some interesting elements here. And again, it looks about what people perceive. So most mothers and fathers thought their children were about the right weight. However, that wasn't always accurate. 39% of mothers and 52% of fathers of obese children thought their children were about the right weight. So it's interesting, isn't it, about families, about what we perceive, what's the norm, I suppose, in our society now. We've heard a lot about low levels of fruit and vegetable consumption, and that's true within the UK, and also about meeting or not meeting physical activity recommendations, because that's also part of the puzzle, part of school life, a part of what we're trying to encourage these and get young people to adopt healthy changes within their lives. So again, we're not meeting physical activity. But, you know, it's failing in boys and about stagnant for girls as we go through. And lastly, we do also have an issue with dental health in the UK. So about a quarter of 5-year-olds having tooth decay and having about 3 or 4 teeth, again, affected. So there are a number of issues which we are working within that context within the United Kingdom, and I've just used some examples here from England. So therefore, there has to be some government on a policy level to tackle these, because not one small organisation like the British Nutrition Foundation can tackle this alone. So therefore, there has to be government policies as well as lots of joining up and collaboration and working together. So one of the key pieces of policy I wanted to talk about this morning was the Childhood A Plan for Action. And we've had Chapter 1, and now we've had Chapter 2. And although we've had lots of different policies in the UK, this is the most recent one, I think probably the most relevant for the audience today. And just as a sort of an example, we've had lots of other policies around universal school meals for young children, about food policy within school. We have a school fruit and vegetable scheme going through. But to me, this is one of the key ones which I really wanted to touch upon this morning. Some of the policies within this plan, and remember this is about childhood obesity, a plan for action. The first one was about the introduction of a sugar tax for soft drinks, so soda to my American colleagues here. And this has started, and I've just got some figures here. So with reformulation, there's about 50% change. And just so you know how much they have to pay, it's 24p per litre if it's got over 8 grams of sugar per 100 millilitres. Or 18p per litre if it's 5 to 8 grams per 100 millilitres. So that is effective, and that work now is leading to quite a lot of reformulation in soft drinks, and the money for that is going into support physical activity within schools. There's also, there's also at the moment a consultation about banning the sale of energy drinks to young people. And that's an interesting one because just talking to teachers within schools, that's something that they actually believe that should happen, but we actually have a consultation at the moment that's active. We also have a sugar reformulation plan, and this is to look to reduce sugar by 20% in the foods most commonly eaten by children. And just to give you an example of what that might be, it'll be biscuits or cookies, breakfast cereals, ice cream, and confectionery, for example. And year 1 is already gone through. There was some mixed movement of room within that, but it's published each year. And I've put the web addresses down the bottom. That's another part. The other one is the calorie reduction program. This is for like foods that are ready-made, so things like pizzas, it might be savoury snacks, ready-made sandwiches, ready meals. So again, that's about reducing calories within those products by 20% to 2024. And then we've also got quite a bit of work around the advertising and promotion to young people, children and young people. And what that's currently happening is we're updating. We've already got some rules within this, but we're actually updating that to reflect the latest dietary advice. So that will be through nutrient profiling, and that work is ongoing at the moment. In addition to that work, particularly focused around school, so you see the first part was very much about more holistically about some of the food that is available or promoted to children and young people. But for schools, there's the potential introduction of a healthy rating scheme. This hasn't quite been figured out yet, but it's about a self-evaluation tool for a school to use to look around aspects of healthy eating and physical activity during the school day. There's updates to the school food provision, so particularly the food-based standards that we have, and again, bringing that in line with current dietary advice. And there was some work a few years ago with the school food plan, and that was very good, and that really raised the issue about the importance of food and nutrition in schools, whether that was from the caterers, so the food provided, or what's actually taught, and also about the parental engagement. So we didn't quite have the 4 Ps, which Diane talked about earlier, but I think it was very similar in its ambition as it was going forward. There's a particular big emphasis within the document about physical activity. So really about promoting this within the school day, about adopting an active mile for young people. There is a mention of the curriculum around food and nutrition education, but my concern was there was no actions around that. It was stated that it's in the curriculum. Isn't that wonderful? Whereas I think it's a slightly missed opportunity if we're saying it's a joined up approach, that actually there should be something around that particular aspect. And our school inspectors, which we call Ofsted, they will be looking at their inspection framework to update that in the future, to include aspects around health, but also to do some research into the curriculum that supports good physical development. And within that, they're suggesting to look at healthy eating as well as physical activity at the same time, and aspects of mental health. And that's actually creeping in to our discussions about children, about schools, about their education as we go forward. So I think that's quite an interesting policy part, and that's just one. There's always lots of things happening in the UK, and I'm not going to talk about Brexit. I just did. Sorry, apologies. I talked enough about that last night. But if we now focus on school, so you've got a picture of child health. It's a bit hit and miss. We do have a problem with overweight and obesity, and we do have a problem with some micronutrient deficiency and lack of fibre, too much sugar, and so forth. We've got some policies in place that are looking to make changes, and they're being monitored as we go through. So let's focus on schools and what's actually happening during the school day. Welcome to the UK. As many of you know, the UK is not just one little lovely island. It's made up, from my point of view, from a curriculum point of view, is that we have a curriculum in Scotland, we have a different curriculum in Northern Ireland, we have a different curriculum in Wales, and we have a different curriculum in England. Now, just to make life easy today, I'm not going to go through the 4 different countries. I'm going to go through England, and the only reason for that is the biggest. That is my rationale for that choice. So 4 different curricula. We also have, through government, joint government, through all the 4 different countries, a set of core competencies for children and young people, which BNF was involved in actually developing on behalf of government. And that's very good because it was about more holistically, not just about children at school, but what about the other time they're out playing, or if they go to scouts, or they go to guides, or they do other extracurricular activities. Learning isn't just about at school. Learning happens throughout lots of different experiences. They may go to sports clubs and so forth. So this was really about what should we look at? What are the markers that we can look at as we go through? So that's been an important document. So I'm going to use England, really, as it's the biggest. So we had a new curriculum in 2014, and this applies to maintained schools. I'm not going to go into the detail about the politics of the different types of schools that we have. If you wish to go asleep, I can talk to you at lunchtime about that part, but I'd really rather not do it in this presentation. So I'm going to skirt on that one a little bit. But within that curriculum, we have aspects about the science curriculum, and you are taught about the body, about health, you are taught about what a nutrient is, and you are taught about digestion. So those are the facts. That's good. That's interesting. That's nutrition. In PE, so physical education, you're about your competence, about being active, and about leading healthier lives. So that's good because there's some interconnect there. There's some connection going together. We have personal social health education. This is not statutory, so it's not compulsory, but that does look at aspects of health and well-being. That may be compulsory in the future. And then we have other subjects, obviously. And what's interesting there is about having that cross-curricular approach. So if you're dealing with geography, talk about food and where it comes from, the food provenance aspect of that. Or religion, we talked about, aspects of multicultural society. Let's use good food examples within geography in religion. And you can also include this in maths and in English and so forth. The way we have the food and nutrition education is within a subject called design and technology. But within that, there's a subsection called cooking and nutrition. So that's what has to be taught, cooking and nutrition. And within that, there are 3 parts. First part is about children understanding where food comes from. It sounds so simple. However, about 4 or 5 years ago, we did some research with children. It was just a very simple survey, and we had 24,000 children in schools take part. And one of the questions is quite simple. It was about, what do you think is in a fish finger or fish stick? So, the little fish finger type thing? The best answer was chicken. Now, there was a clue in the name, fish. However, the other part was, where does cheese come from? And the answer was, it grows on a plant. So to me, although it is quite laughable, what it does demonstrate is there's a real disconnect with children about where their food actually originates. Another piece of work we did with the Jamie Oliver Food Foundation, we had some focus groups, and one little lad was really surprised that, do you know chicken, sir? Do you know chicken? What you get and you eat. Do you know chicken's actually an animal? It's like, yeah, it is. So although I make light of it, actually I think it's quite a serious thing. It's about the disconnect about where food originates and how you take that food, how you harvest it, how you process it, and you make food for yourself, your friends, your family in the future. So that's the first part. There's cooking and food preparation. I don't quite want to put the food prep in, but it's the same thing. So I think some people, purists, think that cooking is about applying heat, but it's the preparing food and knowing how to cook it safely and hygienically. And then it's not just about knowing about nutrition. It's very clearly said it's about applying healthy eating and nutrition for you, your family, your friends, or other people. So it's very clearly laid out in that way. So the types of activities children might do, and this is for children aged 5 to 14 years old, is they may do some cooking activities. So here's some young lads here from school based in London, and they're just making a very simple, they've got some natural yogurt, they've got some fruits, and they're just going to make a layered yogurt and fruit dessert. That's it. Quite simple, but so much fun if you're 5 years old. Okay? So much fun. Another thing might be about learning about healthy eating. On this interactive whiteboard here, it's a resource that we have. It's an interactive. Our healthy eating model is called the Eat Well Guide, and it's a healthy eating guide just to sort of show where the food groups are. Just learning about food groups, where food goes. I remember teaching myself, and I had students that didn't know that the difference between a savoury and sweet food, or they didn't know that chips or fries were made from potatoes. So asking people to know where foods are in food groups can be a struggle for some people. So sometimes, don't assume, let's teach some of the basics. And what we try to do is to build a progressive framework going from early years, from 3 years old, right the way through to 16, that builds on knowledge and skills. But also it's the application of those in a meaningful way as we go through. So what's taught? I'm going to give you an example here of what's expected for a child between 7 and 11 years old. Now, this is all the information a school or a teacher will receive about cooking and nutrition for 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, okay? About 4 or 5 years. So there are 3 sentences, and those 3 sentences the teacher has to then consider and decide, how do I teach this? What resources do I need? How can I ensure there's a progression in learning when they're 7, when they're 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old, and so forth? And it's quite tricky. When the curriculum was introduced, there was no training and there was no support available through government. So part of our role at BNF was to help to support them. So there's a number of issues. So the teachers and the schools, they decide, they interpret. Part of that's good. Part of that is good because you can think about the needs of those children in your school. You can think about the local community needs, the family needs. However, some support and direction is probably quite helpful, particularly if you're a new teacher coming into the profession. You might need some help thinking about how do you work out this scheme of work as we go through. What content do you cover and don't you cover, and why? How do you deliver it? Do you just a lecture like this? Do you get them actually to cook something? Do you go out on a visit? Do you arrange a visit to a farm? Do you grow fruits and vegetables in your school? There's no direction. It's up to you. So what resources might you need? Time, there's no recommendation for how much time you could use. I know one really wonderful primary school, and they seem to teach everything through the medium of food. If you're interested, I can share their Twitter account. It's absolutely amazing what they do. On the other spectrum, it could be very, very minimal. I could take, if I wanted to, those 3 sentences and teach it as one lesson. Done. If I wanted to, because there's no time limit or suggestion. So it's at the discretion of the school. But most schools are good, and that it is an important part of a children's career and development as they go through. So there might be, for me, a slight disconnection about that potential lack of consistency. So whether it's about teaching and learning styles, the pedagogy side, about the time, the resources that are available to that school to teach that. So I think that could potentially be an issue. And then, of course, that resource side could be about what resources they use. So if there's no direction of what resource you should use, I will go onto Google and find out. I want to find out about saturated fat. I could look at my newspaper and use that as a resource in the classroom. So resources are not dictated, and often it's down to publishers or NGOs like the BNF and others to provide those resources for use in school. So as an example, we provide a programme called Food, A Fact of Life. And that's just the website there. We're currently redeveloping at the moment. But essentially, we've developed it with progression in mind, and it's been written by people involved in education and nutrition. We support the curriculum. So this is not an intervention to say, by doing this, it's the silver bullet, it will reduce overweight and obesity. It's saying, if you're teaching this, and you have to teach it, let's make sure you're using quality, evidence-based, up-to-date resources that have been checked and piloted in schools. That's a good thing to have. We pilot things, we check them, we evaluate, we have teacher groups, one in England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, because I wouldn't want to upset people from any of those countries. Access is free, and we focus on the 3 key areas of the curriculum, and we also support teachers. Because that's, to me, another important aspect. You can provide the resources, but we need to make sure the teacher training and support is there to help enable them to teach good, meaningful lessons to the pupils. And we're currently updating the website at the moment. It should be available end of October. And we're also adding on to this, and it was really interesting, Diane's presentation, we're adding a whole school area, and we're also adding a parental engagement area, because often we get lots of requests from schools about, actually, I just want something simple to start the communication, to start the dialogue with parents and carers. Have you got anything? So we're actually going to be starting to support that. And just say last year, for example, 500,000 resources were downloaded from the website. I can't say whether any of them are used, but I know they're downloaded. So that's the next part of our research. So let me quickly just skip on now to the review that we did. And this was with the Jamie Oliver Food Foundation and the University of Sheffield. And we knew that the curriculum was introduced back in 2014. There was no study or evaluation. Often it's not done. But really we wanted to understand, what were pupils learning? How were they learning? Was there any other sort of wider cultural aspects that hinder their healthy eating behaviours within a school? And what do other people think about this? And that was really kind of quite key for us. So we did quite a lot of different research, and I'm only going to focus on the school curriculum side, but I just quickly wrote down that we actually had 25 focus groups with 250 pupils. We had interviews with 700 senior leadership team members. We did a survey with 1,400 teachers. We also had an interviews and online survey with nearly 600 parents, just as an example. So it was fairly big. And I've got the links on this presentation if you want more information in different aspects of this study. So in summary, all of that work was saying there's a huge difference in what schools offer. So there's some schools doing a fantastic job and others that are really struggling, really struggling. And that's just through the lack of time, resource, and the support that they receive. So it's not equal, and that was a good thing from yesterday. It's about the equality of access, making sure all pupils, all children and young people receive good support in this early stage. There were real concerns about the food environment, so about how food is served, the type of food that's served, about, if you've got, in the UK, we would say a lunch hour. It doesn't mean an hour. It's probably about 35 minutes. And if you've got a school of 1,000 or 1,400 pupils, getting through that number of pupils in a short space of time dictates what is then served and how pupils eat. So that's an important factor. And then there was a really strong and clear voice from the parents, pupils, and the teachers saying that schools really should be this healthier school environment. But I think we've come full circle, because I remember sort of about 20 years ago really emphasising the whole school food sort of policy type thing. But we seem to have fallen back a little bit, which is a bit of a concern. So they were the key findings. So then we come up with some recommendations. So schools should be healthy food zones. That's the first one. We should give more support to the school workforce. That includes the teachers, but also about the caterers, about the support staff, everybody, because all members of staff within a school are there to help good teaching and learning and the health of the children. So it should be to everybody. We also wanted to make some improvements about food education qualifications and resources that we have. And we also wanted to make sure that there was stronger reporting and evaluation, because these sorts of things with schools, we don't continually measure them. And if you don't measure them, you're not going to monitor them. So it's quite a simple aspect. So they were the key things which we then presented. And that's the link there, which hopefully when you get this presentation, you can find out more. Of course, Jamie had something to say about all of this. So it's good to have somebody who's got a high profile in this area. But I think one of the key things here is we've proven the simple point that we need to help kids apply food knowledge in the real world, and we need to support our dedicated food teachers. We must stop giving our kids contradictory messages. So it's really good to have that kind of support from a sort of a national big figure in which he is. So some of the key findings here. This is really sad that we've had this opportunity to have, sort of compulsory, mandatory food and nutrition education, but actually what the research was showing that we actually do have some limitations here. So what I mean by that is that of the schools that we worked with, 2/3 were saying there's been no impact in food education since this new introduction of the curriculum, or in fact, it's led to a decrease in lesson length, funding, and teacher resource provision since it's become compulsory. Over half of the primary schools we've been working with, they have less than 10 hours of food education a year. To equate that, that's less than 1% of curriculum time, if that helps you understand what that means. So if it's really important, should it maybe not be 2%, 2.5%? That would be good. And then the teaching, varies quite massively. So the emphasis on teaching varies across the schools. Teachers as well are concerned and they're constrained as well about their delivery of food education as they go through. So where you've got this, they're just resource issues, which I think most people would have. They have issues with their staff training, particularly in secondary schools. And there was a recommendation that perhaps we need some key performance indicators so we can have some measures that we can then monitor how this goes through. So just as an example, we were asked by the foundation, the Jamie Oliver Food Foundation, to suggest some of those. And just a quick example, if I focus to the ones on the left for primary, we were saying, well, as a minimum, maybe they should have 18 hours. And they should have experiences about food origins, about cooking, about applying healthy eating. Schools should provide their ingredients. Quite a lot of schools ask children to bring their ingredients in from home to cook, even though it's a compulsory subject. Would you do that in science? Maybe not. Doing PE, please bring in a trampoline. Maybe not. And also a safe and hygienic space to cook. It doesn't mean it have to be a kitchen. There's ways around that you can work within that. So there were some KPIs. And then there's also been some Ofsted, so the school inspection research. And really what they were saying is that while important, and schools do make a good contribution to child health and particularly around overweight and obesity, it's not the silver bullet, but it is important. But that's what they were saying is that, it has to be about the multifactorial approach and working with others as we go through. Very quickly on to the importance of training. So, as I said, we really believe that this is important. If it's compulsory, as professionals, we should provide training to these individuals delivering these types of lessons. With children who are being taught by some primary school teachers, we did some research, and basically we're finding that although 1 in 3 of these teachers had some food training, actually it was in food safety, and that was more to do with a due diligence to make sure they didn't poison the children, which is an important thing, absolutely, but it wasn't around food origins, healthy eating, and so forth. And the Design and Technology Association, which is the professional association to cover this area for teachers, was saying that within the year of training, they probably only get about 3 hours of study for design and technology, of which food is only one part, because there's lots of other parts within design technology. So that's a particular issue. And then when we go to secondary schools, to 11 to 16-year-olds, we have a big issue where we have lots of non-specialist teachers, so they're qualified, but they're not specialists in food and nutrition, teaching food and nutrition. And just to give an example, last year, only 35 recruits to come into teaching in secondary schools for food education. So there's going to be an issue with amount of staff, not just training. So it's the supply coming through. I think we've got some demand. It's the supply coming through the other end. So providing support, we've developed some competence-type statements with government about what skills and knowledge primary school teachers and secondary school teachers should have to support. We've also been providing online training, which we've developed for primary school teachers, and this has been quite useful. Not all teachers can come out, so they can access this at any time they want. A colleague of mine emailed me last night to say that we emailed last week, 70 teacher trainer providers of primary school teachers got in touch to say that they'd like to take this on, which represents another 800 trainees. So we're starting to have a little bit of impact, and we will be doing some research with those to look at the impact back at school, as well as collecting some case studies as we go through. Oh, that's my buzzer. For secondary, thank you for that. For secondary schools, we've actually developed a food teacher professional portfolio program to support teachers professionally through their career, whether they're trainees or in the twilight years of their life. Everybody's got experiences and can help them develop. So we've got just over 2,200 teachers registered, and we do lots of different work with them. I think one of the key things for them was about understanding what professional development is and is not. It is not always about going on a conference. It is actually about maybe looking at practice, talking to friends, observing somebody else, and so forth. So that was an interesting learn for us. And our research that we've been doing annually is indicating that it is actually informing and changing their practice back at school, which we're really delighted with, and so is the funder. Healthy Schools, I've mentioned, is a bit fragmented. So we did have a very good scheme within England, particularly. Now it's actually funded by local authorities, so it's a little bit more split as we go through. But there's great work by other NGOs. So the Soil Association has the Food for Life programme, for example. We have a government programme called Change for Life, which is particularly aimed at parents and families to eat better and move more. And they also have school resources. There's Magic Breakfast, for example. This whole thing about ending hunger, about holiday hunger, about kids coming to school hungry. Maybe that's a behavioural aspect or could be linked to learning. So that's a really interesting piece of work. But lots of organisations at really small local levels as well as nationally, all trying to work within this particular space. B&F, for example, we have a Healthy Eating Week annually. Last year we worked with schools registered themselves. We didn't make it. It's not compulsory. But over 4,600 schools registered, which is about over just 2 million children, and we had workplaces also take part. I think Nestle in the UK took part, so thank you in the UK. Lots of interest, but again, what they're saying is things they've started with that week, they're going to continue. So we can see that that's actually is having a bit of an impact, a bit of a drive going forward with them. We also try to share practice and not just share what we're doing, but learn from people too. We can learn so much from other people while we're still in the EU. Yeah, we can keep on learning. So we work with our European partners, different foundations across Europe. We produce a European food framework with 5 different countries. We have pilot work going on, particularly great piece of work in Malta. We've really developed a competence framework for young people about what they should be able to know and be able to do. ComNet was an EU-funded project. We particularly looked at biotechnology and agriculture and food provenance. And with our colleagues in Turkey, we've been supporting them doing their work, and they've hit quite a number of children for what they're doing. 1.5 million children, 500 schools in 10 provinces throughout Turkey. So we really believe in the power of working together and collaboration as we go forward. So a few final words, and really what I wanted to say is do remember the good. So some of my presentation was a little bit doom and gloom, okay? But what I want to do is to paint a realistic picture about what's actually happening. But while we acknowledge there are those issues, there's a lot of good work happening, and sometimes against all the odds. So I think we just need to remember this as we go forward. So particularly I would want to advocate for compulsory food and nutrition education, because that's then linking to that equality of access, learning and skill development. So even if it's a minimum standard going forward, removing those barriers to that effective food and nutrition teaching and learning. ensuring that we have that resource provision that's relevant to the curriculum and the qualifications, but also to the young people. When I first started my teaching career, I used to show a VHS video and wheel the TV out of a cupboard to show the video cassette. Now it's YouTube or something really simple. So we need to adapt and be within the media which the young people can engage with and understand. We need to support teachers professionally through their career, ensure that pupils can receive and apply those relevant food skills for them to have healthier lives. We need to champion that good practice. We need to not forget the importance of the parent and the carer. And if you're involved, like we are, be clear, be consistent, evidence-based, and be there for the longer term. So thank you very much.